Welcome to the No Show. My name is Andrea Edwards.
And my name is Joe Augustin. And if you listen very, very carefully, you might hear my little 2-year-old neighbor playing on the piano downstairs.
Nice.
This is a show that is designed to help you think a little wider about the news so you can go deeper beyond the surface. And I think today we've got a theme that's really going to be quite interesting. I didn't realize how much I didn't know, really, to be honest, when I did some of the research that went along with today's theme. So very interesting show ahead of us. Now, the way we make this show a little bit more diverse as well is we bring on some guests to widen the view on things. And our guest today is someone who's a sales trainer and a coach who has lived in China from 2004 to 2020. And he's the author of Winning the B2B Sale in China and the Sales Sales Proficiency Assessment. When he's not working, he cooks for his family, and he is CJ. CJ, would you please join us? Oh, hang on, we'll get you on there.
There we go.
Right.
All right.
Thank you. You left out the last sentence of my intro. I'm a big Joe Augustin fan, so that's one more.
Well, I thought it'd be a bit self-serving to speak of that, but thank you so much for keeping me employed during the dark years of my life.
No, we're really happy to have you, CJ. I think we don't know each other very well, but we've met through an association we're part of, and I always find you incredibly impressive. So it's really good to have you here. Yeah, and to get your perspective on China as well. But do you want to tell everyone a little bit more about what you do and talk about your book as well?
Sure. Like Joe introduced, I am a sales trainer. I'm a sales workshop facilitator. I coach salespeople and a sales team. That goes all the way from the boss, managing director, all the way down to sales reps. So basically, that's what I do, which sometimes can be a little bit boring. The book was written. It took me about 10 years to write the book. Not that it's a very thin book, but I've been writing newsletter articles. Now, long before social media, you've got this email newsletters. So I've been writing those stuff. And when the pandemic hit from 2020 to 2022, I was like having kind of a extended low season period, especially in the earlier months of 2021. So I put everything together, and that's how the book was born. So it's a lot of the stories that I've seen or I've heard from other people that happened in China. And it also it also tries to address certain misconceptions about doing businesses or selling in China.
It's B2B focused too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm definitely going to have a look, because that's always been my focus from the work I do. So I'd be really interested to see what you've got to say.
Yeah, it's all B2B, all the industrial stuff, and whatever you don't see on the glitzy, glamorous retail world.
Nice.
Well, it's a big country and definitely a big opportunity. So today we've got, as usual, lots of stuff. And if you want to go a bit further, lots of stuff to make you a bit crazy. So shall we get into what's been happening in the world?
Yeah, and Tim will be joining us. We're not sure. He's not responding to our messages at the moment, but when he turns up, we'll bring him in. So we'll start off with some quick takes, and it's really difficult with the No Show now to work out what the news that's worth sharing, because it's got to be a combination of entertaining. It's got to be reflective of the whole world, not just one view. And there's just so much going on and so much nonsense going on, of course, because I'm also tracking the conversations on social media. So, I've got a whole other perspective that I can't even share. But anyway, so here's some quick takes, and jump in if you've got any thoughts. So I kind of looked at this piece of news and just thought civilization has ended. Basically, there is a new shoe trend, and there are these enormous oversized plastic shoes. So keep an eye out for that in the weekend reads. If you are a beer drinker, which I am not, do either of you guys drink beer? I know you don't, Joe. Do you, CJ?
Yeah, no, I'm not, but I can see some problems ahead for some people.
Oh, I certainly can. I know a lot of beer drinkers. It's not something my family tends to do, but beer could run low because barley crops in Europe have been decimated by extreme weather events. So get ready for that. Our lovely former president of the United States wants to execute Mark Milley, who's the top general in the American military, and has said that he deserves to be put to death. Okay. Experimental forecast calls for super El Nino by winter, which is, of course, the Southern Hemisphere. A lot of information is coming out about the extreme weather that's coming our way and the heat that we're going to be experiencing. I'm extremely concerned about it. We've got to get ready, because what is potentially going to happen mainly in the global south and in countries like Australia with fire and heat, but we could be looking at some catastrophic events more so than we saw in the Northern Hemisphere summer. Suella Braverman, she's not a very nice person, is she? She's been in the US playing up to the right-wing think tanks, which was our theme last time. But she's really lying and deceiving and making statements that are actually untrue, like saying that there's 700 million refugees when there's actually only 35 plus million for refugees. There's so many ugly politicians. Even Liz Truss has been over there talking to right-wing think tanks as well. So the Gulf Stream is definitely weakening. That's not good news for anyone anywhere, but in the Northern Hemisphere, that means we'll basically be moving back into an ice age. Do you remember we were talking about the American soldier that ran off into North Korea? Yep, he's finally back home, which I'm sure the Biden administration is rather pleased about. He's okay, by the way, by all accounts. Donald Trump and the family have understated and overstated the value of their properties and have now lost their business certifications for New York and all of their big buildings. So Trump Tower, I just saw a picture of Trump Tower on Twitter, which had Letitia James Tower replaced the Trump Tower. So there's a news channel in the UK called GB News. Have you heard of that? It's not one I watch.
Well, yeah, I only heard about it through this little bit here, but carry on.
Right. Yeah, so it only launched in 2021, very right-wing, trying to build an audience anyway. So they're in the firing line. So Dan Wootton, the journalist, was hosting a guy called Lawrence Fox, who I haven't really heard of before. And he was referring to this female journalist called Ava Evans and used the comment, who'd want to shag that, or a variation of that. Look, I just want to give everyone a clue, especially if you're a bloke. Never say that about a woman, because, you know, there's more to women than just being shaggable, just in case you didn't know. And finally, Rugby World Cup mania is in our house. Are you guys watching the rugby?
No, but may I offer the condolences that are appropriate at this point?
Yeah, Australia's out. Yeah, thanks. Well, I mean, you know, they could win the next one and get an incredible score, and you never know, but no, they're pretty much out. So anyway, what about anything else that's going on in the news that you've been noticing that sort of caught your attention?
No, man, I've been doing a lot of things that will come up later on in the what's been distracting me section of the program. So I'm afraid news has not been on my radar very much.
Yeah. Okay, CJ, anything grabbing your attention?
This is some weird stuff. So, a strange story emerged in Florida this week. There's a 13 feet or 4-meter alligator that was spotted in Florida with the remains of a woman in its jaws.
Cool.
But it's so media that he saw an alligator in the Lago Canal. I don't know if that's somehow related to Mar-a-Lago. Lago Canal clutching a lower torso in its mouth. So I'm going to stop here because it's a bit gruesome as it goes on.
Yeah, and we could do that one in a minute. All right. So let's kick off with the bigger stories. So I've been paying a lot of attention to the news around Russell Brand, which broke after the last no-show that we did. And there's been a lot of disturbing elements to it, as there always is when someone like this sort of gets attention. I need to be clear, I never loved Russell Brand. I've never really enjoyed his humour. It's crass. It's not my cup of tea. But a few years ago, I said to my husband, Russell Brand's not really kind of the same guy that he used to be. I mean, he used to be a bit of a fool, but now he's sort of turned into this conspiracy theorist, and Steve agreed. And he started to sort of going into territory that I was just like, whoa. But basically what people are saying now, and some of the media coverage is reporting, is that shift was intentional because he had an expectation that one day this day would come. So what he did, and you can imagine his mind he's an interesting thinker, right? So basically what he's doing is now he's blaming the people who are out to get him. And these are the same people that he was sort of talking about when he was sharing conspiracy theories. And therefore, his audience are still staying loyal to him and protecting him and defending him because of that. And I kind of thought, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. The whole media response to this has been really, really interesting because in this case, it's not just one media source, it's many media sources. And there's a lot of talk of the culture back in the 90s, the bro culture, woo. But honestly, like when you've looked at a lot of the coverage that they've been showing, it wasn't just happening in the 90s, it was happening beyond the 90s. There's a lot of videos and audios being shared of conversations that he's had with various people and in the media. And, he sort of comes across in most cases as just a very naughty scallywag who gets away with what he does. But there were some really serious moments where he was working with and speaking to very senior female journalists, and he was kissing them and hugging them and doing all that sort of stuff. And the women were grinning and tolerating it. And I found that really, really interesting because it's a natural sort of a reaction for a woman not to make a fuss, just, ha, 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 and let's get on with it. But I think it's also a sign that the women and men in the room should have been going, nah, cut that out. That's not okay. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you do, how much money you're worth, what your influence is. You don't treat people that way. Of course, more allegations are coming up. But again, what probably disturbed me even more than all the other things is the attacks on the women who are speaking up. They've all remained anonymous. Don't blame them for remaining anonymous. But, this whole idea of believe her certainly doesn't seem to be holding true. So the final thing is, I am anti-trial by media. The report's out there. It will potentially go to court, and we wait until the findings, get uncovered. But yeah, it's been a pretty interesting sort of story to follow. You guys been paying attention to that one, or just not interested?
Well, I haven't been paying attention to it, but I have an opinion or two about things like that. It has a lot to do with branding, right? I mean, what your personal branding is, what people think you are, how they feel you will behave. Like, I mean, he's often compared to the character in the Pirates of the Caribbean, right? That Jack Sparrow, that character and what that character might do. And so, like Russell Brand of old used to be very much like that, and therefore a lot of the things that he did was within that brand. And we think about how appalled we are when we hear someone who is supposed to be known for great behavior does something terrible. But we seem to be different about what a rock star does, in terms of what that whole thing means, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that it's one of those things where, okay, if we talk about the sins of your past catching up with you, I think a lot of us wouldn't survive that unscathed either. Although I must say, it is more extreme. But I always think about how things have to be judged, if you can, in the moment it was done rather than in this moment, and that's the real challenge with this. So I on one hand, it is why it's very divisive, of course, is that it's not right that it happened, but it's also a different time when it happened. The context is different. All those kinds of things come along as well. And very often what happens is we get mad at someone based on today's standards versus what happened in the midst of yesterday's. So not saying that nothing bad happened, but saying that it may not have been as bad a thing, in terms of getting along and behaving and what have you, right? It's something that we've come to terms with now. We go like, well, a lot of us took a lot of things because we thought we should do it. It was the right thing to do. And so it enabled some behavior which was not ideal, which nowadays we wouldn't even think about, at all. I mean, nowadays you would never think of the things as being okay, and you talk about permission and all these different things. It's all a different time. It's all whatever. I think of myself when I was young, and I wasn't a bad boy by any means. But by today's accounts, I was both a stalker as well as abusive in the way I went about things, right? Whereas
Oh, I never
in
knew
those
that
days,
about you,
I was
Joe.
merely determined. I was just merely determined, yeah.
But let's be clear. I mean, what these ladies are accusing of is grooming and rape, and
Yeah.
so it's not the scallywag being a naughty boy, being a weirdo. It's not that. It's serious violence against women. So they're different things, right? And
Yeah.
but it's for the courts to decide. Right,
Mhm.
Joe, what's the big story you've got?
Well, look down at your phone, and indeed almost anything that you have that's valuable these days, and you'll there's an untold story behind that, how that thing got made, how the things that made it got brought together as well, and it's a supply chain. And now think a little bit more about the bigger picture, because Apple apparently might be coming to terms with climate change in a bigger way. Because so Apple's always been pushing forward. It's been put forward in terms of what it wants to talk about in terms of climate change, in terms of environment and recycling and all that. And one thing it does rely on also, of course, is as all good companies do, they find the cheaper way to do things, the best way, which might be the cheapest way to do things. And for that, many of that has landed in the Asian region, down the middle of the near the equators. And what's happened is, because of the way climate change affects these places, the supply chains are actually very much affected as well. So, like when you hear of a big flood somewhere in Asia, it's likely to be hitting one of the maybe 400 different places that Apple gets its various little components for its phones. And not just Apple, of course, everybody else in the world relying on those things. So the climate change is affecting big companies in a way that is not as easily understood, right? And to be fair, I mean, look, the supply chain thing is a thing which happens way beyond just climate change. Every single thing that happens in the world can cause a glitch in the supply matrix, right? So, yeah, I mean, for Apple and big companies, the way the world is changing as far as the climate is concerned is increasing the risk for them, because a lot of these efficiencies that come from that part of the world are therefore also affected by the climate, the hair trigger climate that they live in right now.
Yeah, I thought that's a piece I think was in Bloomberg. I thought it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Just like the factories that are producing the parts in parts of the world which are going to be hitting heat extremes, and they might not be air conditioned, or if they are air conditioned, they're still on the grid, which means that they're not independent if the grid goes down, so that the people basically could be thousands of people working in these factories, So I thought it was a fascinating piece.
For someone like as big as Apple or the subcontractors like Foxconn, if it's a power issue, they probably might have their own power generators, so that they could try to do some workaround.
They do and they don't. So because this is what do you call it? Number 3. So that's not one of the things that was referenced in this article. And if they do rely on generators as their backup, so they start falling over around about 40 degrees. So basically, they're just talking about the vulnerabilities in the system for extreme heat, extreme flooding, all the stuff that we've been seeing across the region. So it's going to be interesting.
One of the key things that a lot of people forget about climate issues or global warming, it's flooding. We thought that the sea levels is just going to come up and it's going to be a hot day out there. We forget that there is going to be a lot more evaporation, and as a result, the rain is going to be a lot more harsher. And like what Joe mentioned, the supply chains that are beyond the control of individual factories will be very much affected.
Yeah. All right, CJ, do you want to talk a little bit more about that alligator eating a woman?
Well, no. In a way, it's bizarre. It's just someone spotted an alligator in Florida, And initially that person thought that there was a mannequin. It wasn't, and yeah, it's someone who's living sadly in a homeless camp near the wooded area at the time of death, and it's just, I mean, if we are just to look at this story, it sounds like it's just some tabloid news, but it reflects a bigger social issue. Over here, I mean, we're talking about the richest country in the world, the country with the highest level of GDP, that's the United States of America. And then you've got large swathes of people who are homeless, because this victim, unfortunately, was from a homeless camp. And you don't put America with some place that is infested with alligators, and that alligator actually ate someone. It's just bizarre, sad, and gruesome all at the same time.
Yeah, very gruesome. And the homelessness angle of the story was an important one, because her family came out sort of talking about, their sorrow about losing her. But it didn't really sort of talk too much about why she was in the situation that she was in as well. So, yeah, it was just, but if the body was never found, would anyone ever know, right?
Probably not, yeah.
She just disappeared, right?
Yeah.
So Tim was going to talk about Australia's favourite son, Rupert Murdoch. He stepped down as chairman of not Fox News, but the Murdoch Media Empire, News Corp.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Lachlan's taking over. Some people say he's a little bit more relaxed. Others are saying he's not. But anyway, there's a great article in The Guardian which call him a climate villain, and a whole bunch of climate scientists have been speaking up about that. But I want to move on to the UK, which has been quite... Oh, sorry. The UK just... It's almost... I almost can't believe that such a great country, or once great country, is where it is now. It's rivers are full of sewage. It's destroying everything environmentally. I mean, did you hear about the lone tree up on Hadrian's Wall that was chopped down by vandals? This beautiful 200-year-old tree. It was just, it's just like, oh, come on. Feels like it's really becoming a broken society. But we saw just in the last week or so that, they're really, the Tories and Sunak are really showing their stripes. They've cut back on net zero pledges, which created outrage all over the world, claiming it will help the people. When I'm not really sure which people, because, the ordinary person will be worse off just from an energy bills perspective, because one of the things that landlords won't have to do is put insulation in homes. So that's going to cost the people living in those homes more. Then the Rosebank oil field was given the go-ahead, which also created lots and lots and lots of conversation, including that the taxpayers would have to front the costs up front. And then the oil will be exported, so it won't be helping the UK at all, and that money will be going to Norway. So that sounds like a really good plan. But I think for me, the big one is that the government has announced that it will delay new environmental building rules. So this was expected to come in November. And basically what it means is it's delaying putting into effect new environmental laws for developers to improve countryside and wildlife habitats. It's called Biodiversity Net Gain, BNG, and it was meant to become mandatory in November. When I was reading through the details of why it hasn't happened, the one thing that really stood out to me is incompetence on a massive scale. It needs new laws, new regulations, guidelines. It needs to be educated across the entire country into all the councils. Like all the stuff that needs to be done, and it kind of makes you wonder if the Tory parties has any big picture thinkers left, because it certainly wasn't thought through. Meanwhile, across the channel in France, Macron has unveiled a national ecological plan to reduce France's greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030. So not 2050, 2030, and that's compared to 1990 levels, which is a really good thing. And also end the use of coal-fired power by 2027, and that's a really important one. So an extra 10 billion euros has been put towards the 50-point program. 10 billion doesn't sound like a lot. And it's basically trying to ensure that France is competitive agriculture and industry moving forward. So it seems like the French are going in the right direction. If you're not keeping an eye on it, there's so many interesting things going on in France in preparing their cities to be more climate resilient. So definitely have a look at that. Joe?
Well, I mean, I think it has a lot to do with the culture as well, right? I mean, the readiness of different cultures to do different things. The UK is in such a mess that like when you're trying to when there are leaks everywhere, it seems like a good idea if you just plug one or two ideas, at the same time. So they're struggling. I mean, they're struggling for power, struggling for credibility. And they're also a bit out of touch because the whole I think as you're talking about that story, I just kept thinking to myself, trickle down. The idea of trickle down, which has been long proven not to work.
Just a quickie. So one of the big things that has really worked in France is citizen assemblies. I'm going to try and do a show on that, but basically bringing the citizens together, educating them about the risks, and then they come up with the plan. So reducing. You can't get on a plane in France if you can get there on train in 2.5 hours, stuff like that. The Citizens Assembly recommended 4 hours, but they compromised, and that started off with the mayors in the cities, and then now it seems to have sort of filtered up into the national politics. So I think citizens' assemblies and involvement, and educating them and then giving them a say and giving them a voice, I think that seems to have been a really significant turning point for the French, whereas the UK is not doing that. And like you said, the disconnection, the distance between the average working class person and the multi-millionaire, billionaire prime minister, it just, like, when he says this is for the people, I'm like, how? Like, how is that for the people?
Well, someone sold a story that made enough sense along the way, and that's always been the imbalance of access, right? So for me, when I was listening to it, it's like it's when industry, for instance, pushes back and says we can't do it, here's why, and then on the other side, because you don't know enough, you go like, okay, I accept that. Singapore is a bit of a counterexample in terms of what's going on. Like, in business in Singapore, whether or not you want to do anything about the environment, it's coming for you in your ACRA. Your ACRA requirements are building, and the requirements for doing business in Singapore as you grow into a bigger company automatically make you an environmental citizen. So it's those kinds of things which where so the government says, you know what, tough. This is the way. This is what business is about here, right? Whereas in the UK, they get a bit of that. And I think I was just thinking about in terms of the environment that you're in as well, because France is in a subset, as in like it's part of Europe, and Europe's accepted a certain way of dealing with certain kinds of things, and so that moral high ground exists for them to kind of stand on and say that we will do this. There's a European style of doing things. Brexit was a bad thing. Brexit was just a reaction to get out of that, and now they're acting out in that sense. The 17-year-old who leaves home the first time. You do all kinds of things which you may regret when you're a few years older. Here's a bit of engineering news about the return of asteroid samples from an asteroid called Bennu. Okay, so good news and bad news. There's a chance that somewhere in the next 300 years there will be an asteroid that will destroy us. The name of this asteroid is Bennu. Good news, we've been to Bennu, we took some samples and we brought it back. So we're going to find out some stuff about the asteroid, and not just about the asteroid, about the beginning of the universe and how the Earth happened and all that kind of stuff, which is nothing to do with stopping it from hitting us. But what's really amazing as I hear about this particular story is the way we got this sample, right? So NASA sent a rocket into space, a spacecraft, the OSIRIS-REx, and it managed to land on this it's been called the most dangerous asteroid in the planet, in the universe, because it could completely destroy us. They managed to land on the asteroid. They managed to get a sample off of that. They managed to pack a capsule of the sample and send it back to Earth. And if you do the research on this particular story, what you should really, really be impressed with is the fact that from all the way over there, from a high-speed moving target, they've been able to send the whole thing back and land it not just on Earth, but in a specific area on Earth with accuracy which is mind-boggling. Those samples, like I said, will tell us nothing about how to stop it if it's going to come our way, but at least we know that we have the ingenuity that can come up with ideas like that. And well, I think on a geeky day, I feel it's a great day for science, but just completely impressive what human invention is capable of.
Have you got any idea what they're expecting to sort of uncover? I haven't had a chance to dig deeper into it.
Well, I mean, it's like in a crimes when there's a crime committed or some kind of criminal investigation, there are persons of interest. This asteroid is an asteroid of great interest. To give you a perspective, right? It's about 2.5 times in terms of length, 2.5 times the length of the Empire State Building in terms of how tall it is. And that's not a good description of proportion as well, because volumetrically, I just estimated it's about 8 times the size of the Empire State Building. So just imagine a mass that large coming our way. We're greatly interested to find out what it's made of. So that sample is kind of going to help a little bit in that respect. But yeah, we're trying to find out as much as we can about it. But you know how opportunistic scientists can be as well. While we're trying to solve this rather big existential problem, the other scientists might go like, oh, and here's a chance to find out where the universe began. So, it's scientists having fun in the midst of really what is a grave problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah, right. Interesting. Well, if they could land a spaceship on that now, and it's not going to hit us for another 300 years, hopefully our technology has evolved. But hopefully,
it's sometime in the next 300 years.
Right. Okay. All right. So moving over to the stands, CJ.
Right. Unfortunately, I'm bringing news of death again. So September events and the term ethnic cleansing. Unfortunately, it's happening in Azerbaijan as thousands of ethnic Armenians are being killed or had to leave or flee from their home. And some Western media are calling it genocide. So that's something that's happening. But what struck me about this is it's more to the tragedy of the people of one country killing the people of the other country or driving them out, is that the issues or conflicts between Azerbaijan and Armenia went back hundreds of years, for many years. So the Azerbaijanis are being supported or backed by Turkey, and Armenians are kind of backed by Russia, and there seems to be some bad blood that stretched many millennia, and unless and until we are able to find a way, or the two peoples are able to find a way to live with one another, to tolerate with one another. Cases like this, be it ethnic cleansing, be it war, be it genocide or anything, is going to repeat itself again and again. This time it could be the Azerbaijanis doing something ethnic cleansing to the Armenians, and the next time it could be the Armenians doing something back to Azerbaijanis. And it just doesn't end.
Yeah, I mean, when you study the sort of the history of the politics, it was interesting, and of course Russia's a bit preoccupied at the moment, but it was just some 70-year-old women just saying I've been through 3 wars, I'm done, I'm out, and so just yesterday they've decided to evacuate that entire area and hand it back to the Azerbaijanis. So now we've got this big refugee sort of situation going in Armenia, but they're saying we're welcoming our brothers and sisters, but obviously that's going to be a bit unstable for a while. But yeah, it was just, we need peace, we need togetherness, right? Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, I don't know. I mean, it just sometimes baffles me, as in what drives people to just go out there and not just kill one person, but kind of try to get rid of a different kind of people altogether. It's not just I don't like a certain race and I'll just try to sideline them and kind of ostracize them, but actually going out there and kind of wipe them out of a certain area. So it's what is the conflict or anything that's so huge? What's a hatred that is so huge that will drive one people to do that to another people?
Yeah, it's kind of that's popping up everywhere around Russia and Ukraine, and sort of popping up around the world, right? And it's sort of,
the thing about this is it's as a situation, it's unbelievable that we're here. It shouldn't be the case, right? But in terms of understanding why we arrive at these situations, many times we can actually understand it, because what happens is when cultures come together and we hold too strongly to our values, everybody wants to hold their values, and there's conflict in the values. That's where the problem comes, because the only way to deal with, I believe this to be completely true and right and moral, and if you have a slightly different view on it, is that you have to be wrong, right? So that is the challenge that we have, and I always think about it. What I'm trying to do in my little way of the world is always find out what you care about, what your values are, but hold on to them lightly, right? Because that's going to give you a chance to see some of this perspective. We were talking about Rupert Murdoch before. Rupert Murdoch had no choice but to speak his truth, his point of view, and because he had the power, he did it as loudly as he did. But that's also, the way we are. We tend to want to speak our truth, and especially if someone's going to come at us and attack us and whatever it is, we're going to get more resolute in that. Which is why these days we have people who are more convinced that the Earth is flat.
Yeah. We'll come to that in Distractions and Books. It's a great book that explains all that.
What's it called?
It's called Misbelief by Dan Ariely.
Okay, right. Yeah. I'm kind of think holding onto your values lightly. Is that the right way of thinking about it? Because I know exactly what you're saying, Joe. With like everyone sees the world through their own eyes and their own worldviews, right? We've seen, the whole Dominion thing with Fox, that they are pushing ideas and thoughts and beliefs out there that they know are untrue, because there's a commercial incentive for him to do what he does, right? So is he speaking his truth, or is he just being greedy and wanting to make money and control the world? Or the Western democracies, English-speaking democracies. So I don't know if I agree with that case, and I think it's important to be deeply anchored in your values. So is it values that you're talking about, or is it culture? So the differences of opinion between two groups of people that have to coexist, right? Is it values? Is it culture?
Well,
history?
I think we're getting right into the topic for today, because that really, I think, is going to come up as well. This is what I was we were talking about what I was surprised by as I was preparing for today. It was really about the theme for today. So when that comes up, we can talk about that.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So just a couple of pieces, because there was so much to go through. And there's a really heartbreaking story about a little girl in Ireland who is black, who wasn't given a medal at this ceremony, and all the other little girls were given a medal. Anyway, it happened in March 2022, but it's just hit social media and everyone's talking about it. And I still to this day can't understand how this happened, other than the woman who was giving out the medals literally didn't see the girl that was standing in front of her. Because I think that sort of, everyone's apologizing unreservedly, no question about it. But that's I just sort of felt for that little girl. So that's back in the news, even though it sort of happened 18 months before. I'm sure Gymnastics Ireland went, oh, phew, we got away with that one. It's not getting international attention. It is now. But some other ones. So Antarctica is coming out of winter, of course, and its ice levels that are at the lowest levels with lowest annual maximal maximum level, so doing well. But there's a great piece in The Guardian. There's lots of information coming out about Antarctica, and this is important because it's about to go into the summertime where we're going to experience more significant melt, which means more water will be absorbed into the ocean. There's a great piece in The Guardian called "Indigenous Women Are Showing Us How to Fight for Environmental and Human Rights." I shared it on social media a couple of days ago. It's a beautiful piece, and it's also a map. Another one, "There is no hope. Death and desperation take over the world's largest refugee camp." And this is obviously about the Rohingya in the camp in Bangladesh. And we got to sort stuff like that out. Yesterday, we learned that the Swiss glaciers have lost 10% of their volume in 2 years. And an article I just shared it this morning and said I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dark laugh. So microplastics in clouds may be contributing to climate change. So they're all up there in the clouds, and because they are actually made of fossil fuels, there's a chemical thing that's going on, and they think it's actually contributing to climate change. So anyway, keep an eye out for all of those in the weekend reads. I'll publish it tomorrow late in the day. Lots going on. Yeah, you guys ready for the theme?
Let's do it.
And we, as always, we speak respectfully of anyone or anything that we speak about. And I'll share 2 videos in a moment, which I shared with the guys to have a look at before. And they're both talking about China's economy and the recent BRICS activity. And one's from Al Jazeera, another one's an interview with Jeffrey Sachs. But before we kick off, I am not claiming to be an expert on China at all. And CJ's an expert on China within the context of the work that he does, right? But Joe and I, we're just, we listen to experts and then we try and make sense of what they're saying. And then we have conversations about it, which is essentially what the No Show is all about, right? Trying to make sense of complicated stuff so that other people don't get confused, especially in this world. So we're not experts. We're just having a conversation. But recent coverage has been focusing on China's economic woes. And one of the experts that I loved in the Al Jazeera video was Gary Ung, who I think is based in Singapore, but he sounds like he's got a Chinese accent. Do you know him? Have you come across him?
I don't, yeah.
But I thought he was really amazing. And his thing is it's an expectations issue. So basically, the West is expecting more growth than China is saying it will experience. And I thought that was an interesting one. Of course, the whole property market seems to be at the core of the economic woes because they've now got an oversupply of homes. So I want to ask if you guys can answer this. How did China get into this point? I mean, China's a country that plans. China's a country that thinks long-term, that thinks ahead. So how, and this property issue has been going back for a few years with Everglade and everything else. With Joe, you've talked about it before. So how did that happen?
How did it happen? Okay. First of all, don't trust anyone who claims to be a China expert. They're not. Right? And two, well, in a way, China plans ahead, but at the same time, China can be very myopic. It is known for playing the long game on many things, but it can also be very myopic just to go for quick wins. And one of the quick wins that we all have mentioned about the overbuilding, it probably, I mean, it could have started much earlier, but it probably gained a lot of momentum. And 2008, 2009, we had the Great Recession, financial crisis, and China's response was to inject into the economy like $4 trillion or $40 trillion, I can remember, into the economy. So there's a lot of money in the economy, and what the local governments did was to just take the money, and the easiest thing you want to turn that money into an investment is to build buildings. So they take the money, they relocate the farmers, and in a nice way, they actually compensate the farmers quite fairly. I wouldn't say handsomely, but fairly. Get on the farmlands, build buildings, build condominiums on them. Some of the farmers are having it great because they got a new house, new car, new everything, and they don't have to work a single day for the rest of their lives. But obviously, there are a lot of empty units that are being built, right? So it all started from there. And the moment you build a building on an empty plot of land, you increase the value of the land. Okay, so that's a way.
Say that again. The moment you build an empty building, you increase the value of the land.
An empty plot of land, you increase the value of the land.
Okay. Yep.
Right.
But if you can't sell the building, have you increased the value of the land?
Well, that's something to be planned later.
Yeah.
Because the moment you have building, you probably will have roads that lead to the building. And you build something, you increase the value
infrastructure.
of that plot. Infrastructure just increase the value of the land. So it became kind of a surefire shortcut way or immediate way to collect revenue from land sales for the local governments. Local mean different cities, different counties, and all that. So it became a modus operandi for local governments just to sell and build, and if you build it, they will come. So that contributed to part of it. The other part is that the developers now, what the developers need to can do is to sell the buildings, that whatever they've started building. They don't need to complete the building of whatever they started to build to sell it. So the moment they start to do the foundation, the moment they start their construction, they can sell the properties.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are no laws to make sure that if I sell my property before it's been TOP'd or completed, I will need to make sure that the funds go into the completion of the building. Right. Yeah. So in a way, if I'm short of cash and I want to do some business, I can start construction and start selling, and then it will ease my cash flow, and I'll still get it done, which is what is done in Hong Kong. But in China, there are no checks and balances. There are no checks to limit them, to say that the money you collected has to go into the building first before it goes anywhere else. So what the developers did was to collect the money and use the money to buy a different plot of land and start constructing and start to collect money. So that's how the whole bubble was built. And so it all started in 2008, 2009, and it's now 2023, and it's a huge bubble. There was a crackdown on property development that was done in 2022, which was firstly a little bit too late. It should have been done much earlier when the bubble wasn't that big. And secondly, it was in the wrong time, because you have the property market crackdown, you have the tech crackdown, you have private education crackdown, and then you have the great lockdown of China, all in 1 year in China. So it just got a massive perfect storm of everything that are happening at that moment. So if anyone, if there's any other country who see that they are an enemy or adversary of China, that is the best thing they would have hoped for China. It is a massive own goal by China, President Xi Jinping, to do all this. Too many things in a very short amount of time. It is also an own goal in the sense that he does not know where to get objective feedback and listen to that feedback before going all in to have a very heavy-handed measures all across the board.
Interesting, Joe. Have you got some thoughts?
I look at China as a very agile elephant. It's heavy, big. Its strength is there definitely. And if you've watched elephants, they don't really fall over very easily, right? The thing is, once in a while they do, and I see that as the way China approaches its path in the world, as in, like, we know where north is, and we're going to keep going in that direction. We have some guiding principles along the way, and we do little experiments all on the back of the elephant. So while the small experiments are happening, the whole elephant is still moving in that same direction, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the things like all the stuff you mentioned about the corrections and the crackdowns and what have you, right? I think there's two ways to look at it. One is, well, okay, there's China stumbling, or China is being accountable all at once to the mistakes that it's making and going, you know what, this is what we have to do right now. We're going to keep going. We're going to fall on our knees, but we're going to catch up. We're going to get up again and keep walking. So, China doesn't stumble often. It just keeps moving slowly and resolutely, doing the same thing. I think not predictably, but like expectedly. When you look at an elephant, you don't think it's going to change directions very quickly. You know where it's going, and you don't get in its way because it's very hard to get in its way. I don't know if that's a good analogy for CJ.
Okay, couple of things. China do stumble, and this is not just recently. They have been stumbling, and it's not that pronounced because the economy has been growing really, really well, and it kind of the growth in its economy kind of covers up for a lot of its mistakes. And one of the biggest stumble, and I hope this is not broadcasted in China, because we're talking about Tiananmen incident in 1989. So that was a huge, massive stumble, right?
Yeah.
And it took them in 1991, 92, 4 years before Deng Xiaoping went to southern China and revitalized the private enterprises to revitalize the economy all over again. So that stumble took 4 years to recover. Right, so it sounded like, yeah, it's like 40 years ago. It's a long time ago, but
no. I remember I was at university, but I kind of I'm wondering, did it take them have they ever really recovered from it? Like I know that in the country, the way it's discussed and not discussed is, but outside of the country, it's still very much there. It had a huge impact on me because it was university students. Yes. And I was a university student. The uni in Melbourne was surrounded by these images of these protesters who were being killed. So, yeah,
you can say they never recovered from it because it's a taboo topic. No one's supposed to mention it at all. Even Hong Kong right now, every year there was a candlelight vigilance in Hong Kong. It's now banned by China, by mainland China. So it's a taboo topic. But economically, if you're talking about business, then it sure had. Recovered and recovered well. It joined WTO shortly after, and the rest is history. Just went off this path of massive growth. So China has stumbled, and on the other hand, China can react very quickly if it wants to. So you have just an example. You had something like a zero COVID lockdowns for like 3 quarters or close to 1 whole year, and then all of a sudden it says, hey, we're not doing zero COVID anymore. Well, from tomorrow onwards, no more tests, no more lockdowns, no more concentration, whatever we call it, military hospital or 10 hospitals to segregate people if you're found to be tested positive and all that. None of that overnight. Okay, so it has the ability, despite its size, to change directions at the drop of a pin. So it can be very agile when it wants to, and at the same time, it did stumble various times in different degrees over the years.
Yeah, right. So the Jeffrey Sachs interview, which I'm interested to hear what you think of that, CJ, because I know you're not a big fan, but. I just found it a really interesting perspective, his commentary around the US and how they're just constantly trash talking China, which we're all seeing in the media, and the Western media is it's all about anti-China rhetoric, right? I've lived in Asia for 20 years. I haven't lived in China, but I've been around Chinese culture, and the one thing you don't do is you don't trash talk. It's just not, that's not the way. That's not the way you move forward in things in this part of the world, right? But he was talking about the militarization of the US dollar, which, of course, has been a big issue, and we've seen it happen, and the whole BRICS angle of the militarization of the dollar. But he's looking at the habit of the US, who always looks back versus China, which always looks forward. And I remember working with a Japanese company, and they had a 20-year, 30-year, and a 50-year vision. And I'd been working in the technology industry, global technology industry for 20 years. And if anyone had a vision that was longer than 10 years, I was amazed. So there's it's a different thought process. And I think I've always felt that it's not a difference that I believe is widely understood between East and West. And I think if we could understand it, we could move forward. There's different ways of thinking. Americans think in quarters, annual, the financial years, whereas, the Chinese are like 50 years, 100 years ahead. What do you guys think?
Let's talk about U.S. first. Let's digress to the U.S. first, and I'll come back to China in a while. I got a friend to say that this is into all these, and say that if you look at the U.S., the U.S. has got certain edges that they're leading in certain fields, and they're really great in those fields. But however, if someone else were to catch up with them and overtake them in those fields, they had a hard time catching up. And the modus operandi of the U.S., instead of looking at how we can catch up on the people who caught up with us, they will try to pull down the people who have caught up with them. So that has happened with semiconductors in Toshiba in the 80s and 90s. It's happened in various other fields as well. And right now it's happening to China. So it's not so much of East and West. It's just U.S. being the U.S. They'll try if you caught up with them on something else, they'll try to make sure that you don't catch up with them, not because they're better than you, but they'll put roadblocks in a way and try to sabotage you, and so that you don't overtake them. So that's just U.S. And China. I mean, if you're looking at long term, well, in a way, being an autocracy and being what I call singular party system, being a Leninist state in that sense, it's got the leeway to look into the future for the next 5, 10, maybe 20 years. But it does not go way much beyond that. I mean, it does have a kind of a Chinese dream of what they want to be X number of years forward. But at the same time, they are also in a hurry to get to there. And again, it could be because after joining WTO, China just took off like a rocket. They just got immediate results in everything they do. So the expectation is, if I do something today, I'm going to see results at the end of the year. So that's the mentality of China. They're looking at quick results. And back to the part on Gary Ng's comment about what the West expectation of China is and what China's experience in China in itself. China was a part of what we see in China, the stumbling and all that, has to do with their fixation of trying to overtake the U.S. in GDP. So they're just focusing on GDP, and they're just growing at all costs. And although there are voices even from the central government to say that it's got to be quality growth and not just making the numbers for the sake of making numbers. But over years, it's just there's just a huge focus on when is China? When are we going to be number one in the world? So there's this sense of hurriness, sense of urgency, just to get the number one spot. And of course, that's part of the reason why the property bubble became so huge, and it's all feeding to this subconscious goal of X.
So it's all part of the reason that we're destroying the Earth is because we're run by egos.
Yeah, in a way, yes, yes, and it's not just the ego of a few at the top. It's also what is being fed in society, in Chinese culture, in social media, that we're going to beat the US. We're going to be number one. We have overtaken Japan. We are now eyeing for number one. We will be number one in X number of years, maybe earlier. So that's the thing that they had been doing. And right now, and again, how fast China can change its tone, it says that screw it, I'm not going to talk about GDP anymore. I don't care what the GDP is. It can be 3, it can be 5. I don't give 2 hoots about it. Let's focus on other stuff, right? So in a way, they came to a realization that, well, whether we are chasing up with the US in terms of GDP or not, it's going to be a longer shot now as compared to a few years ago. And they might as well focus on other things that are going to take time for them to heal in terms of their economy.
Yeah, right. Okay, I want to throw an idea at you that I've just been pondering, and I have. It's not an idea that is being presented anywhere. It's just me interpreting behavior and information, right? So, but listening to what you're saying about their only goal is to be number one makes me think maybe this isn't possible. But do you think it could be possible that China is basically now sort of swiveling around and it's focusing on its green economy, and part of that will have to be stripping out as much of the crap in its system as it can, which is essentially the cheap stuff that gets shipped out to the rest of the world, which has been the cornerstone of building their economy. But in the meantime, it will be getting ahead of the West in its green evolution, because every country understands that they've got to go through a massive transformation right now. And I think if any country is capable of doing it, China is. But so while China's already well ahead in many, many areas of green technology, it owns solar, it owns all sorts of stuff. Do you think it's basically sort of spent the last few years with a renewed transformation vision because things had to stop because of everything that happened? They've also stopped because the extreme heat waves last year buckled the entire supply chain, and this year they've got wiped out by floods. But it potentially could not be talking to the West about it, because why would you bother talking to the West? Because it's one, it's a competitive advantage, but two, they're not exactly listening anyway. But in the meantime, the West is waiting for China to come back as it was, and China's not planning to do that. And then so the entire Western economy is going to be based on the as it was model, and China's going to be moving ahead in this new model with new customers through the BRICS, because they're going to be looking at other countries around the world and moving on. Which means that the entire West could get screwed over, and they could get their number one place, because if the West based its economic growth on an existing infrastructure that no longer exists, then so anyway, can you feel where I'm going with this? I'm just wondering, do you think it's possible that China could be doing that they could be building that model and that idea in their head and just making it happen without sort of showcasing it, so they got a competitive advantage for once, rather than copying? Which is what they built it on, right? They built everything on copy. Now it's a case of innovation and transformation. Right?
China has been, I mean, with or without emphasis on being climate friendly, China has been trying to go up the value chain and trying to go into something that are more add value and less labor intensive and less polluting. They've been trying to do that, and unfortunately, because China has got a socio-economic issues. So when I'm saying about the economy in China, it's not just about the drop in its GDP. I'm talking about, we probably read in the same news that it's got a high level of youth unemployment. It's got the overall unemployment it's an all-time high. Certain sectors are not recovering, and people are just hungry for jobs. So when that happens, it's got no choice but to fall back on the labor-intensive, the high pollutive industries that are back. And to a certain extent, in Singapore, we are told to recycle stuff, right? So we've got this blue recycle bins. We put in stuff and recycle. Now, of all the plastics in Singapore that has been dumped into those bins, only 6% are being recycled in Singapore.
Yeah.
The majority, either they're cast away or they're being shipped to China.
Or they've been incinerated.
Either they've been incinerated or they're being shipped to China, and I don't know what China does to it.
Is China still taking the waste from Singapore?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
They're still taking waste from all over the world. It's one of the few places. China is also one of the most polluting industries. Surprise, surprise! It's clothing. It's actually textiles. The ink on textiles is highly pollutive. So a lot of countries do the making of clothes, and China is one of the few. China, I think, and India are one of the few countries left that goes into textile dyeing. Colors on clothes, on our clothes. So China is still doing that. So unfortunately, because it's poorer, it's got issues with growing its economy. It's left with less choices, but to take in anything that will help them create that employment.
All right, so all these extreme events, I mean, the flooding in China that we've seen this last year. The year before it was the heat wave that just wiped everything out down south. And this year it's been the typhoons and the flooding. And you don't think so. I fully appreciate what you're saying, but I think to transform to a green economy and a green future requires pain.
Yes.
So you don't think that they're just saying, okay, we're just going to have to get through this pain. The West will face the pain when they're ready to do it, but we're going to face it first. And maybe they just need to work out how to get through the pain without revolution toppling them.
On top of the green economy, on top of going green, there are many different types of pains that China has to go through. And China right now is like kicking the can down the road. Besides the climate stuff, which I know that you are really passionate about, China's needs to do a lot of reforms in the way they sell houses. They do property development. They've got a lot of reforms they need to do with their legal system, with the constitution. There are a lot of things that need reforms before they can stimulate the economy. But they're not doing that because it's going to be very painful. It's going to be very painful to the key stakeholders in the upper echelons of wherever they are, of the party and so on. So it's just too painful. And for now, the number one issue that China is, or the Communist Party in China is the most concerned, is youth unemployment. Because if you have large groups of people who are unemployed and unhappy, and they're young and they're loud and they got a shorter fuse, it's a formula for massive riots and social unrest, and that's a serious no for China. So between going green, between protecting the climate and having massive social unrest, they'll rather risk the environment and kick the can down the road and resolve it later, and no one knows when later is, and focus on how do we keep these restless young people happier right now.
I've got to say I'm a bit disappointed to hear that, because I understand it, obviously. But welcome, Tim. We're just about to finish, but good to have you here. I just learned in Pakistan that, I don't know what the word is, but there's a phrase, and it means men standing around leaning on walls. Mm-hmm. That's basically what it means. And there's a huge population of men who are unemployed, out of work, bored, and they literally stand around leaning on walls. That's how they spend their days, right? And it's a disaster for any society to put themselves there on so many levels. So, but the unemployment of the youth, it's also educated youth, and they're not going to want to go and build apartments. They're going to want to have jobs that, that's what they've got to university.
There are now a lot of educated youths are now delivery writers. They're doing the equivalent of Grab food. Some of the ladies are now domestic helpers because they're paying better than office jobs anyway. So, especially if they're bilingual, they got good English. They are domestic helpers for expats. So
yeah, right. That's kind of like India about, I don't know, 6-8 years ago. You turn up to a big corporation headquarters, and the person behind the counter had a PhD in molecular biology, and the only job they could get was to be a receptionist. And that was a big problem there. I don't know if it's still a problem. I'll have to speak to someone. Joe, Tim, any thoughts on China before we wrap up?
I love China. Don't cancel my visa.
No, they love your Singapore dollars and Aussie dollars. So please come to China and spend all the money there.
Now, one of the things that I've often noticed about China is that they've never been welcomed at the big table. It was always about, well, you haven't earned your place yet. You haven't earned your place yet. And I think we have to think about countries like human beings as well, as in a person, right? China, the person, has been disrespected in so many ways. As in, first of all, you're bullied. You're not recognized as being significant because your economic system is whatever it is. And then we say like, oh well, and then what happens is they come up as a big economic power. They are, and then they put runs on the board, and they still don't have the seat at the table for real. I mean, China is there because you have to let the guy in, but he's being treated. China as a person is being treated as the nouveau riche. They don't have the status yet. They don't have the gravitas. We have to give them a seat at this table. We'd rather not, that kind of thing. And I think what happened for me was this change in mood. It was like, China said, we're going to try, we're going to do this, we'll play the game your way and all that. And I think they just came to a point. It seemed like it came to a point where they said, you know what, let's screw this. You have your party over there. I'm going to start my own thing, because you're the social club that won't really accept me. Okay, us guys on this side who are not so much accepted as the mainstream, we'll do our thing, and then I think that's what happens. That's why BRICS came about. That's why they had the energy for BRICS, is because, well, you don't want us there, so here we go. We can
build our own table.
We can set. Yeah, we create our own thing, and then because I think that the old Chinese culture thing is that, okay, we have a relationship together, we will work on that, and we will build a relationship and feed the relationship, pat each other's backs. But if all you've been doing is leaving poke marks or stab marks in my back, then that's the invitation. In terms of reciprocity, that's the invitation that you've given out. So the West has created this resentful, as a character, it's a resentful being that would be happy to see you fail, because you know what, that'll show you.
I don't get China as being the resentful one. I get China as being the almost in one sense the more mature one, that's like a parent figure standing back while the teenager's rebelling. and because China plays the long game. China plays a 500-year game, and America plays a 3-month game, and or certainly a 3 to 4 year game, to try and stay in electoral power and stuff like that. So and that scares that sort of level of maturity, and I say maturity, I get that there's other parts as well, and rhetoric and everything else, but that sort of sense of maturity has it's scary for the one that needs to generate fear, to generate business almost. So I don't know. It's a really interesting dynamic at the moment. I get Joe's picture though. It's almost, they've been, they were treated very badly by the East India Company and the merchant ships that came over and were, started to trade, and then just went, you know what, we don't have to trade, we can just take everything. And then took stuff by force, and just China was playing a mature. It seemed to be playing some sort of mature game, but and then
one of the really interesting pieces in it. I agree, and I totally agree with Joe. I think it got to the point where it's like, well, screw you. You're not going to give us the respect we deserve. So we're going to go. We'll build our own table. And I think it's the same for India. So any of the groups like the G7, China and India should be on that table, and should have been for a long time. But there was a really interesting part of the BRICS. So two of the countries that are looking at being invited are Egypt and Ethiopia. And I thought it was Jeffrey Sachs that did the video. Yeah, I thought it was really, really interesting, the perspective that he offered, that for China, it's not just about so both of those countries have got huge citizens, growing populations. They're 2, 3 in the African continent, all that sort of stuff. But one of the things that really appealed to China about those two countries were their thousands of years of history, which China believes needs to be honored. And I thought that was such an interesting perspective, right? So that we should, rather than looking at the old failed civilizations, because all civilizations fail, but to honour the legacy of countries and, to give them a seat at the table for those sort of reasons. I thought that was a really sort of cool observation as an ancient history buff.
So it's almost we'll deal with civilizations, not you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the thing about back to Joe's point about China being resentful, part of it, I mean, in a way, the West has been patronizing China and whether it's the G7, G20, or whatever, those American constructs. It's born out of the American
institutional racism, right?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say racism in that sense. Well, there's Japan in there, so it's not that. It's just U.S. centric. It's U.S.'s club, so to speak. It's my club, and it's not because of being racist. It's just like I'm inviting my best friends. So and China is not one of my best friends. So that's that. And on the other hand, we were sort of saying that China is just nouveau riche, and China has been behaving more and more like a nouveau riche over the last 10 years or so. So that's again how China is playing into what the West is going into in that sense. So I mean, anyone can set up its own club, and here in Southeast Asia we got ASEAN, so anyone can set up own club and have your own friends and be happy about it and drive your own objectives. Now the key thing about China is that China needs the West. Unfortunately, China is not at the stage where it is sufficient. It is also not at a stage where it can just sell to everybody else except the advanced economies. So just give an idea of how big the economies are. So China's number two. China's number two position is bigger than the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth economies put together. Right. So that's the scale that we are looking at, and what it means is China's biggest customer before all these conflicts that happened. China's biggest customer was that number one. So it was the U.S. And of course, China alone is bigger than 3, 4, 5, and 6 put together. The U.S. is of course much bigger, and that's the growth engine that is importing whatever that China churns out, and that's part of it brought prosperity to China. So in that sense, China still needs the advanced economy to drive its economy. Jeffrey Sachs mentioned about business to ASEAN, to Southeast Asia. It did, but do remember the reason that ASEAN has a growth, it's because a lot of that exports to ASEAN get re-exported back to the US. So it's the US that's driving everything, and Southeast Asia is just a conduit because there's this China-US trade war, so you can't sell direct, so indirectly ASEAN benefits. So it's in that dynamic. It's not that straightforward that you can just say screw you altogether, and I'm going to start my own. No parties are there yet at the moment. So and back to the U.S. The U.S. needs China as well. It's not. Why do you think that anyone from Anthony Blinken to Janet Yellen to whoever it is has been making so many trips to China, although they're saying that let's talk, but I'm not lifting the sanctions, but let's talk anyway. It's I need you, and I would love to work with you as long as you can play by my rules. And this concept applies to the U.S. and it applies to the Chinese government as well. I'd like to work with you, but I got to play by my rules, and I think that's the fundamental agreement that both sides have. And everything else is this huge disagreement that they're trying to figure out how do we work with one another.
Yeah, I think the comment, nothing's as straightforward. You see people expressing opinions, and they've got so much clarity in their opinion, and there's so many other perspectives that are relevant and deserve to be heard as well. And I just think nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. It's big and it's complicated and it's messy, and we'd like it to be certain ways, but it's not. But it's keeping an open mind, reading different views. Someone told me the other day that a person they spend a lot of time with only ever watches one media channel, and disagrees with everything I say. And I'm like, well, that's okay. I don't watch one media channel. I watch hundreds of them, and because I want to get different perspectives, and that's what we try and encourage everyone to do. But CJ, that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts before we go on to what's keeping you distracted?
Well, there's this thing about resentment and stuff like that, right? I don't want to put it out there like China is the resentful one. You know how at clubs, when there are new members that are admitted to clubs, who qualify for the clubs, the old members resent the new ones. I think there's a lot of resentment the other way as well. So that's just the
Absolutely,
it's
yeah.
like
It is.
it's, the whole thing is I don't think anybody feels they can do without each other. It's whether or not I feel I want to do this for you. It's like, when I was working in the hotel, I didn't love everyone I was making a bed for. There were some people who were nice, who I wanted to help, and there's some people who I would, if I could, do something about it, but I still served them. It was resentful surface. The reality is we leak no matter how, like the ideas about the long game and all those things, right? Those only come up when you're on the losing side. No one talks about the long game when they're winning. No coach is going to go like,
I think
well, if you think about most times when people talk about things like, oh, you don't want to worry about money is not the most important thing. Those are all things that come in as placations to your situation where you haven't got it. It's not to say that there isn't a wisdom to the long game, because I do culturally. I look at the like, for instance, Indian culture, all the nationals that come over here and they're earning their little money at a time and they're doing business, and it's all very small profits for a long time. They have culturally embedded the long game. But I think, along the way, people like for instance, if you think about this, should China have to play the long game, given what they've done and what they've achieved? Do you now have to go like, well, and now we still have to play the long game? Didn't they score the fast pass to play along, right? I mean, like I was the thought that crossed my mind, which again is the warped thinking, was, should China have played a bigger role in World War II so that the Americans could have felt guilty about it? Like the way Germany and Japan basically benefited from that the whole thing, right?
Yeah. And China played a much bigger role in World War II than we knew. And it's not given a place, sadly. That's a different episode.
All right, distractions. What's going on? Who wants to go first, Joe? Oh no, let's put Tim first.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Hugh Laurie.
All right, okay. Now you've been
I'm sorry.
House,
I'm a big fan of Hugh Laurie, who was the series House. So I finished the whole series House. And one of the things that he's been doing, I've been following what he's been doing since. It's really crazy stuff. I mean, now he's got a blues record. There's 2 blues records out, and the first one sold 1 million. So that was bizarre to hear him singing the blues. But the series that I just finished, short run, it's 2 seasons only, and it was on HBO by the producers of Veep. It's a series called Avenue 5. It's sci-fi. It's set in the future. They're in space. It's all the I think Andrea, especially, you'll enjoy it, because it does the tropes of corporate greed and all that kind of stuff. All of that come by. But it's a luxury spacecraft in space, and they're in trouble. And then that's when they realize they're in a lot more trouble than they really thought they were, because of all the things that corporate greed has done along the way as well. So it's called Avenue 5. Avenue 5. It's on HBO. I think you'll be able to catch it on HBO Max if you have that.
All right, Tim.
I just came back from a conference, so that's why I was a bit late today. It wasn't where I thought it was. It was in a completely different part of the country. But and I wasn't even speaking. I was there to support a speaker. But but what's been keeping me distracted has been papers, and so I just submitted a history paper, and now I've got a pastoral theo paper about to go through, and I've just been and I'm going to Cambodia to speak Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week.
Wow.
So that's a speaking gig for an association coming over there, and so so at the moment there's scrambling of preparation till I think for the next couple of weeks there's a fairly steady stream of there's another history paper coming up in 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks or something like that. So I've just submitted 3 papers this week, and I'm working on my 4th one. So it's
Whoa.
crazy,
Whoa.
but I'm a little bit responsible for the craziness, which yeah. So
Aren't we all? All right,
it's good.
CJ,
I'm loving it. I'm loving it, but
that's good.
the pressure is kind of interesting, different.
Yeah, it's been a while, right?
It has been a while, and I'm just like, should have done this ages ago.
Yeah,
but
right.
But still, I wouldn't have been the same person, so it's all right.
Yeah, CJ,
Long game.
Exactly.
Long game, yeah.
CJ, what are you? What's keeping you distracted?
Two books. I hardly read books these days unless they're really good. So one is again about the topic of China. So the new book on President Xi Jinping. It's called Party of One.
Okay.
Yeah. So to go get into, if you want to go into the brains of how China's going to work in the next 5 years, that's a book. The other one is Misbelief. By Dan Ariely. So this is the guy to talk about why we cheat, and this book is about why smart people make stupid choices, or why rational people will make irrational choices. So have a look on that.
You like it? All right. So
and what's the reason? Why do they do it?
So
why you can't just tell us the book's called Why They Make. What's the actual? What's the reason? I need to know.
Well, I think you miss where we're discussing is like there are lots that's happening that as we go along, there are more and more people who believe that the Earth is flat. There are more and more, even though we've got serious floods and thunderstorms and whatnot, there are more and more climate change deniers. So and a lot of these people are they're educated, they're smart, and they believe something otherwise. And also way back in Singapore, we've got very smart people who are anti-vaxxers, who has got really built entire conspiracy theories around vaccinations, COVID. So that's the bigger context to it. And part of it is, I think we discussed earlier about how we need to, what Joe mentioned about have a light touch on your values, how we tend to identify with the group that we belong to, and we tend to stick with the group's beliefs and mentalities rather than to see things on our own. So that's what's driving those misbeliefs.
Yeah. Well, I read so much, as you guys know, that it's very difficult for me to get stuck into a book. But I recently decided I needed to read Ministry of the Future. And if you have an opportunity to read it, go for it, because he's a storyteller first, right? And like when we're talking about China and what China is or isn't doing from a green perspective, and you read the book, and so it starts off with this very first chapter where 20 million people die in India from a heat wave from wet bulb temperatures. And it's the response to that. And the Ministry of the Future runs all of these organizations where everyone has to commit to the Paris climate deals. And it's in the future. So it's sort of making a mockery of where we are now. But at the same time, that's where we're heading if we don't do something different to what we're doing. So it's a very, I don't know how long it'll take me to read it. I'm trying to just every day commit at least, going to sleep and reading a book. Another series I've just started watching. My husband's away, so I can watch different things. So Margot Robbie is obviously famous because of Barbie, but she started off her own production company, and I've just watched one of her first programs, and it's on Netflix, and it's called Made, and it's about a young lady who's got a 2-3-year-old daughter who escapes an abusive boyfriend. it's fascinating. And I think the idea of her sort of production company is to tell female stories that aren't necessarily being told. And you watch, I've only watched the first 2 episodes, but I'm absolutely gonna finish it. How difficult it is for her, the girl, to survive. So keep an eye out on Made. It's a dark one. I'm often looking for lightness to distract me from the darkness, but I know I do have a lot of admiration for Margot Robbie. I think she's a very intelligent person, and I respect her. So, yeah.
Reese Witherspoon did something similar, setting up her own production company and was telling stories with women as leading characters, same sort of thing, because just the industry just wasn't supporting it, so she had to do it herself.
Yeah. I mean,
we need our rules. I'll start my own club.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly right. But we need everyone's stories to be told to understand the societies that we're in. AJ and the Drag Queen was a Raoul Paul series, and it didn't get repeated. And I thought that was such a shame, because I felt that it was a true representation of a community that I didn't have a lot of time to spend with that community. So I think all those stories should be told, because if you can tell all those different stories, we have more compassion in societies and more empathy and more understanding of each other, and we need that, right? So, and Reese Witherspoon, Nicole Kidman, and there's one other one. They're still doing it. They're still doing that. Yeah, so it's good.
Yep.
Anyway, all right. CJ, thank you for joining us. If you're around next Friday, I've got a couple of mates joining me to talk about Australia's The Voice, and just to try and get to the bottom of what the noise and the arguments and the anger and the fear, the furor that seems to be around it. I want to make sense of it.
There is also fear about The Voice in China.
Right.
It's got the same program as franchise, and it's.
No, that's the singing one, is it?
No, not the. It's
this is a different one.
It's the rights for the first peoples to have representation.
There's a referendum in Australia for an Indigenous voice and constitutional change and a parliamentary bit for the Indigenous Australians. And so the population has to vote yes, we're going to give them this access to government and everything else, and sort of put it in the constitution, or no. And it's a real bipolar problem, polarizing problem.
Murdoch's going hard on the no vote, and 70% of media in Australia is owned by Murdoch. So
did we talk about him standing down already? Was that in the news today?
Yeah.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you when we're going to have a school holiday break in between. So we'll see you in a month. And I think, Joe, you'll be missing your first no-show then, right?
I think so. I've got something else pressing to do.
Yeah. So Tim has to be on time.
You can do some ironing.
Do
some pressing. Nope. Okay.
All right.
When? Okay. Anyway. Yep.
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Sorry,
CJ, you're a legend. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Thanks for watching,
Bye.
man.